The body is the instrument of our hold on the world. A pleasant day to everyone. I am Hunch, I'm Sumagaysay, and together with me is Alyssa, Janine, Madurar, and Pia, Samantha, Arcenas. And we were going to talk about the AXIAL skeleton. The AXIAL skeleton consists of the skull, the 8 cranial, 14 facial bone, hyoid, auditory ossicles, vertebral column, and lastly, the thorax, which includes sternum and ribs. The bones in the AXIAL skeleton contributes to homeostasis by protecting many of the body organs, spinal cord, heart, and lungs. The purpose or the function of the AXIAL skeleton is to provide support and protection for the body's organ. Now we move on to the skull. The skull has its features and functions. It forms several cavities, including the nasal cavity and the orbits or the eye socket, which opens to the exterior. Other small cavities within the skull house the structures involved in hearing and equilibrium. The mandible is the only movable bone of the skull. The function of the bones of the skull is to provide protection and structures. Structurally, it provides an anchor for tendinous and muscular attachments of the muscles and the skull of the face. The skull is divided into two, the 8 cranial bones and the 14 facial bones. Cranial bone form the cranial cavity or the space formed inside the skull, which protects the brain. It has named occipital bone, sphenoid bone, ethmoid bone, frontal bone, a pair of parietal bone, and a pair of temporal bone. A pair of parietal bones or the parietal wall form the greater portion of the side and the roof of the cranial cavity. The internal surfaces of the parietal bones contain protrusions and depression that accommodate the blood vessels and supply dura mater, the superficial connective tissue covering the brain. The cranial bones join together at the top of the skull, and they form at the side of the near cranial bone. A pair of temporal bones from the inferior aspects of the cranium and the part of the cranial floor. They are the side and the base of the skulls, and they are also overlaid. That's what we call the temples. Occipital bones forms the posterior part and most of the base of the cranium. Sphenoid bone. It lies at the middle part of the base of the skull. This bone is the keystone of the cranial floor because it articulates with all the cranial bones, holding them together. Sphenoid bone can be found in the middle portion of the neurocranial, and it looks like a butterfly. It is in the front of the temporal bone, and it is one of the 7 bones that forms the orbit. Frontal bone is a bone of the skull found in the forehead of the 8 bones that form in the cranium or brain case. The frontal bone is the bone from your forehead. Ethmoid bones is like a sponge-like appearance and is located on the midline of the interior part of the cranial floor, medial to the orbits. Ethmoid bone is found between the 2 eyes, and it separates the nasal cavity from the brain. Now we proceed to the auditory ossicles. The auditory ossicles of the middle ear transmit sounds from the air as the vibration to the fluid-filled cochlea. The auditory ossicle can be found inside hard and dense portion of the human temporal brain. The ossicles are the middle bone of the ear, and it is the smallest bone in your body. There are 6 ossicles in total. These are the malleus, incus, and stapes.
Facial bones. Now let me tell you that this bone forms our face, and it consists of 14 bones, and we are going to tackle about it in the next consecutive minutes. So based on the shown slide, facial bones form the face. It provides cavities for the sense organs, specifically the eyes, the mouth, and the nose. It guards the entrances to the digestive and respiratory tracts, and serve as attachment points for facial muscles. All these facial bones come in pairs except for the mandible and the vomer. The first facial bone that I am going to introduce to you is the 2 nasal bones. These bones meet at the top and form the bridge of the nose. The rest of the supporting tissue of the nose consists of cartilages. Up next is the 2 maxillae or maxillae. These paired maxillae unite to form the upper jawbone such that they articulate with every bone of the face except the mandible. The third one is the two zygomatic bones, the cheekbones. It forms the prominences of the cheeks. Obviously, they articulate with the frontal, maxilla, sphenoid, and temporal bones. The mandible. The bone is familiar to all of you since we use this bone to chew food. It is the strongest, largest, and the only movable skull bone. The fifth facial bone that I am going to introduce is the two lacrimal bones. These are thin and resemble a size and shape of a fingernail. These are posterior and lateral to the nasal bones. Thus, they also form a part of the medial wall of each orbit. So, an orbit is the socket of the skull that the eye and its edges are positioned. Two palatine bones. It is an L-shaped palatine bone from the posterior portion of the hard plate. It is a part of the floor and lateral wall of the nasal cavity. Thus, it is a small portion of the floors of the orbits. Inferior nasal conchae. It is a scroll-shaped paired bone that rests at the lateral wall of the nasal cavity. It helps to filter and humidify the air that we breathe. The last facial bone that I am going to introduce to you is the vomer. It is a triangular-shaped bone on the floor of the nasal cavity that is superior with the perpendicular plate of the ethmoid bone. Now that would be all about the facial bone. Next part of the axial skeleton is the hyoid bone. Now as you can see in the slide, the hyoid bone is unique since it has a U-shaped form and it does not articulate with any other bone. It is located in the anterior part of the neck between the mandible and the larynx. This bone supports our tongue. It provides add-on sites for some tongue muscles and for muscles of the neck and pharynx. The hyoid bone also aids to keep the larynx or the voice box vulnerable at all times.
The vertebral column is also known as the spinal column or the backbone. The vertebral column houses the spinal canal, a cavity that encloses and protects the spinal cord. The vertebral column surrounds the spinal cord, which runs within the spinal canal. It is also acts as an attachment point for the ribs and muscles of the neck and back. The vertebrae are divided into groups. There are 7 cervical vertebrae, 12 thoracic vertebrae, 5 lumbar vertebrae, 5 sacral vertebrae, and 4 fused vertebrae. The vertebrae are numbered and divided into regions. The first one is the cervical. The 7 cervical vertebrae are numbered from top to bottom, the C1 to C7. The cervical vertebrae is found in the neck as shown in the picture. Next is the thoracic vertebrae. It is found in adult humans and it is found in the mid-back. The main function of this is to hold the rib cage and protect the heart and lungs. It is numbered as T1 to T12. Next is the lumbar. It consists of 5 bones from top to down, the L1 to L5. The main function of lumbar is to bear weight of the body. Next is the sacrum. It is a shield-shaped bony structure that is found in the base of lumbar vertebrae that is connected to the pelvis. It connects the spine to the hip bones or the iliac. Next is the coccyx regions. It is also known as the tailbone. It is a small triangular bone resembling a shortened tail which is located at the bottom of the spine. It is composed of 3 to 5 coccygeal vertebrae or spinal bones. The thoracic cage. It is also known as the rib cage. It is the skeleton of the chest that is consists of the ribs, sternum, thoracic vertebrae, and costal cartilages. The thoracic cage is narrower at its superior end and broader at its inferior end, and is flattened from back to front. It includes and protects the vital organs such as the heart, lungs, and great vessels. The sternum and ribs form the thoracic cage. The sternum or the breastbone is a flat, narrow bone found in the center of the anterior thoracic wall that measures about 15 cm or 6 inches in length. It protects the organs of our torso from injury and serves as a connection point for other bones and muscles. Next is the ribs. There are 12 pairs of ribs and numbered as 1 to 12, from the superior to inferior. It gives structural support to the sides of the thoracic cage. The cartilages of 8, 9, and 10th of pairs of the ribs attach to one another, and then to the cartilages of 7 pairs of ribs. These false ribs is called the vertebrochondral ribs. Costochondritis is the inflammation of one or more costal cartilages. It is characterized by local tenderness and pain in the anterior chest wall that may radiate. The symptoms mimic the chest pain associated with a heart attack. The injuries in the chest. First, the rib fractures. It is the most common chest injuries from direct blows, most often from impact with a steering wheel, falls, or crushing injuries to the chest. Rib fractures are quite painful. The dislocated ribs. It is common in body contact sports, which involves displacement with the costal cartilage from sternum with a resulting pain, especially during deep inhalation. The last one is the separated ribs. It involves the displacement of the rib and its costally cartilage. As a result, the rib may move superiorly, overriding the rib bone above and causing severe pain.